And we give the floor for the keynote speech and the welcoming speech to Hans Fenstermacher, who is the operational director of the United Language Group and the moderator of the business track. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues and friends. I'm very happy to be here today. First of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to Stanislav Kaleniuk and the organizing committee for inviting me. That's indeed a unique event. I've never stood in front of such a lively and at the same time rude an audience. But you cannot imagine how this looks from here. I'm very happy to be with you, and I want to wish all of us a great and successful conference and good spirits.
I won't confuse the interpreters too much, I hope. I will like to switch to my remarks in English. I thought perhaps for this group, we talk a great deal about technology. We talk about process, we talk about workflows, we talk about tools. And sometimes we forget to talk about us. We forget to talk about people. And so I thought it might be interesting to say a few words about the kinds of things that, from my perspective of 30 years plus in the language business, would be interesting for us to think about what kinds of skills, what kinds of knowledge, what kinds of directions our people need to be moving in as we go forward in the industry. So I'd like to share with you a few thoughts very quickly about a few topics leading up to some small conclusions from my perspective, my modest perspective on this topic. First, we'll talk about what I would call the 5 habitats of the language industry. Then we can go forward to looking at how the language industry has evolved over the last decades, which gives us some perspective on where the industry may be going. We will talk a bit about the industry itself, the offerings that the companies and the providers in this industry offer and provide to clients. And then we'll get into a bit about what I think are some important skills that the workers, those of us who are in this business doing this work, need to have as we go forward. And I will conclude with a few remarks on something I've called Homo Linguisticus. Not sure what that is, but perhaps over time we'll all help determine what that species becomes. So to talk about the 5 habitats of the language industry. And this is, I think it's very interesting that we're in a habitat of sorts here, because I think when we're in the industry, we sometimes forget that there are different kinds of environments, different kinds of places, different kinds of habitats that we live in and that we work in. And some of us are more comfortable in some habitats than others. And so I think it's worth taking a look at what these look like. The first one, of course, is the one I think is most familiar to all of us, the language habitat. We're all, to some degree or another, linguists. Even if we're not professional linguists, we're in the deep in the language sort of environment all the time. And of course, our focus here is on things like grammar, on sentence structure, on terminology, the kinds of things that make us all very excited when we talk about language. And we use metrics like accuracy and completeness and these kinds of things. So this is an environment I think that most of us are very, very comfortable in. The second one that's very closely related is culture, of course. And culture is all about a focus on meaning. It's all about how an audience will interpret what we're doing, right? How a locale looks. What does it mean to be creating something for a locale? And there we focus on aspects like fluency and appropriateness of the content, appropriateness of the language and the cultural metaphors and the cultural kinds of images that we create. And the key there is for us is for it to be familiar for those who are consuming the content. Then we get into an environment that maybe, or a habitat that's familiar and very comfortable for some, and less comfortable for others, I think, in our business, in our industry, and that is the business aspect. And here we talk a lot about cost. We talk about price. We talk about turnaround time and quality issues as they relate to our business and how we can develop our clients better. And the metrics there are all very customer-centric. You know, they're all about efficiency. They're about sort of profitability. They're about creating a value for the business ourselves. And some of us are quite comfortable in that, I think, and have developed a familiarity with this habitat that's very, very strong. And others who are more comfortable in the language habitat find the business one a bit intimidating. It's a little scary to be concerned about business, and sometimes not very interesting for the linguists. Then there's the habitat of technology. And we all know we've grown up with technology. Many of us have come through the development of the industry where technology was just beginning to be part of what we do and now is central. And here we're talking about many kinds of things that are driving our business today. Volume of content, velocity, how quickly the content is moving, and the variety of the kinds of things that we have to deal with. And the technology is the only way that we can actually master this content. We can't do it without technology. And yet, many are uncomfortable with some of the technological aspects. We talk about MT this morning at breakfast. We were talking about MT and how scary MT, machine translation, can be for many in this industry. And so that's a habitat that's more familiar for some than others. But the key there is cost effectiveness and scalability. We need to be able to meet the demands of the market, and technology is the way that we're going to be able to do that. And finally, I would single out the habitat of sales, because I think separately from the management of business, the sales aspect is something that is crucial to the business that we're in. And we're all in business, whether we're freelancers or have a very large company or a very small company. There is an aspect of sales that we have to be comfortable in. We have to be able to add value. We have to focus on the customer, make them happy, and we have to be able to compete with others. And so this is a very sometimes uncomfortable habitat for many in the business that we're in. And I think one of the keys we need to keep in mind is that we have to be compelling. We have to present a case to our customers that will make them interested in what we have and make them see the value of what we're going to do for them. Now, these habitats have always existed. They've been around for a long time, and the industry has developed, I think, through them. I was talking with Kimmo, who's up next, about some of our long history in this business, and it's developed quite interestingly from very modest beginnings. And I thought we would just take a quick look for some of you who are, I think, younger than my children. This might be interesting to hear a bit about how we have gotten to where we are today. You know, in 1982 actually was when I started in the business fully as a translator myself. This was a very human-powered business, and it was a case of everything was analog. There was no digital. There was no scalability. Everything was quite manual, and at the center of this industry was the human. And you see some of the devices that we had, some of the tools that we had at our disposal, the typewriter and dictionaries. We quickly evolved, though, into the 90s to sort of a world of text and form, where we began to deal not just with words, again, moving from the language habitat more into culture and more into kinds of business-related aspects. And we dealt with interfaces, we dealt with communication. And this was the time when the project managers began to become important, because translation was no longer an individual activity. It was now required a whole team. And then we move into the 2000s, where we have developed a whole set of institutional knowledge around translation, where multitasking is required. There's no such thing, or very few places where you can be a single tasker, do one task only. There's far too much to do in terms of producing our translated content. And it's become a bit commoditized. You know, it's become sort of, and I think in some markets more than others, there's a great competition regarding price, but not much else. The quality doesn't seem to matter sometimes. The kinds of services seem to be less important, and the most important thing is the price. And that sort of began once these processes really began to scale up, when the amount of content and the languages in particular. And you can see I've had these little flags at the bottom of the slides. With each of these stages, we've gone from more and more languages to be produced. And so in the 2000s, we were looking at dozens of languages perhaps to be produced, and the driver there was content. And now I think we're in an age of sort of industrial processes. It's a time when automation is critical, when scale matters a great deal, when you have to be able to put in place a system and a team and a set of knowledge that can handle very large volumes and many, many languages, sometimes even into the hundreds of languages. And so it's a very different environment where some of these habitats have shifted in terms of importance going forward for us. Now, in the process of all of that, our language industry offerings have evolved too as well. And I'm not talking so much about types, you know, translation versus localization versus interpreting, but more in terms of the nature of or the perception around these kinds of offerings that we've had. And back when I started, and I don't know if somebody like Kimo will feel the same way, but many of my customers who wanted or who had to do translation considered it a nuisance. They considered it troublesome, difficult, expensive, and their very highest wish was for translation to disappear. And of course, this is not something you like your customer to say to you when they say, I wish I didn't have to do this, because of course, you don't feel very comforted that they will continue to have work for you. But it was very much a basic kind of requirement environment. There was a lack of tools. There was a lack of a lot of things. And so everyone was struggling. And in some markets and in some places, we still have that today. But that's kind of the basic level of the offering that our industry has. Now, if you go forward a bit, we've developed into a more experience-based model, where we talk about adaptability of content and workflows. And we are able to have more resources that we can provide for the customers and give them more value. The main feature in this kind of environment, in this kind of service offering, is reliability, where our customers can say, okay, we need regular, reliable service and regular, reliable resources that we can develop. But it's not a very mature model. It's simply taking the nuisance, the annoying factor of localization, and deciding, okay, I have to live with this, so let me see if I can make it more efficient for myself. And then many companies and many markets have moved into, I think, what I would call a level of science, where we look much more at precision of how we do things, and what is the rigorousness, what is the sort of structure around what we can do. How can we do this in a very methodical way, in a very scalable way still? And very much moving towards the ability to predict, how do we manage this work? Can we provide flexible workflows? Can we provide flexible time frames? Can we provide models that will accommodate different kinds of needs? And many companies have moved into this way of servicing their customers, not just basic transactions, but beginning to be very scientific about how they do the work. And finally, I think the sort of stratum that we are beginning to move towards in many cases is one of influence. This is a case where, instead of simply providing a transactional kind of service, we are able to integrate with the customers. We can actually understand what they're doing, what are the outcomes, the results that they're looking for. How can we add value to what they're doing, not just provide, a bag full of translations for a few cents, but actually create an integrated stream with them. And it's not an accident that I have Steve Jobs here. I think some of you might even recognize Steve Jobs. Does everybody recognize that this is Steve Jobs? Okay, a few heads are not nodding. I think they're possibly too young. But I think this is something that Steve Jobs understood very well, which was, it's not so much about, having the perfect tools or, the perfect environment and all these kinds of things, but understanding your customer, being able to help your customer move forward and really integrate with that customer, and then at some point even lead the customer. Help the customer do what they really want to do, but at the same time be in the forefront of that. And that's something that we're looking to do as an industry as we go forward, and some companies are beginning to achieve that with their customers. And so as that progression happens, we need skills to be able to do that. This is not something that just automatically happens. We need to start building on the process of how do we actually create these kinds of results for ourselves and our customers. And so I think I've identified a set of skills that are changing over time, I think. The first one is obvious. It's language. It's lingual skills. And we have to, of course, continue to have those. The focus here is on how do you move between two or more languages. That's the obvious place for all of us. We're very familiar. The old process was one of fitting the skills, fitting the process into the skills. So we knew we had these individual skills. We created the traditional translation, edit, proof process, and so we have created this model that continues to exist to this day. Very linear, separate skills that occur and in sequence, and many of our workflows have been basically adapted to this old set of skills. I say old, but this basic set of skills. I think in the new environment that we're heading into, that we're transitioning into or continuing to develop, we need to look at how do we hyper-specialize, how do we super-specialize these skills, and how do we create new kinds of linguistic structures and linguistic workflows. So something like, and I haven't read here these little examples, post-editing of MT, which is not a traditional kind of skill. And many of you in the audience are translators, and you probably don't like post-editing MT very much. But I think that's something that over time we'll have to develop as a more specialized kind of skill and become something that we are very comfortable doing. The second set of skills is entrepreneurial. We're in a very fast-paced, very market-driven business, as you know. And being entrepreneurial is critical. Having an understanding of how business works in general and being able to adapt quickly is critical. So in the old days, the business was very basic. We were the companies or the agencies were between the translators and the linguists and the customers. It was simply a pass-through in many cases. I know when I started in the business in 1982, we were called envelope changers, which basically meant you take the translation out of the freelancer's envelope and you stick it in the envelope for the customer and you send it. And of course, some of those continue to exist today, but that's a very old and dying model and really is not, of course, adding any value. So in the new set of skills, we need to look at how do we redesign business models? How do we, in fact, create this area that integrates between the language piece and the customers and give them some new value? And I've put here an example of crowdsourcing. Again, something that many people are resisting in our business, but I think crowdsourcing is still in its infancy. We're still trying to understand what does that mean exactly. And over time, those skills will help us develop a new kind of model that serves our customers better and at the same time allows us in the language business to create value for ourselves and for them. The third set of skills, I think, is technical. And we're not going to get away from technology, and we don't want to get away from technology. It's critical for us to have tools and to have metrics, because that's how we can measure ourselves and how we can understand where we need to improve. So one of the things that happened in the old sort of paradigm is that we would let the technology skills determine, they would sort of drive our purpose. And I think translation memory is a good example of this. We created translation memory many years ago, 25, 30 years ago, I'm not sure exactly when, but and quickly it became sort of the driver for how we do what we do. So the tool ended up driving our work. And for a while that made sense, and it probably still makes some sense now, but it's something that is going to need to change over time. We're going to have to look at how do we move beyond letting tools tell us how to work, but in fact adapting those tools into the skills and the values and the outcomes we need. So, for example, I've put a very complex term here, predictive resource optimization, which I'm not even sure what that means in English, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's important for us to start looking at how do we determine how to get from here to our result and be able to predict accurately that we can do it on time, profitably, with the correct results so that the customer's happy, and repeatedly. And it's that kind of looking at this that has to happen so that we don't just simply say, well, here are the tools we have, what can we do with those tools, but instead, let's work according to those tools, but instead, what do we need to achieve as a result, and how can we adapt and predict how we're going to use those tools accurately. And many companies are starting to look at this down to, for example, being able to look at the freelance or outsourced resources and determine, is it better to give this translation for this marketing piece to Alfredo on Tuesday or on Sunday, because he does better work on Tuesdays than he does on Sundays. Now, that sounds perhaps funny and not very serious, but in fact, it's all based on very serious analytics for how work can be done and where the most efficiency is to be gained and the best results can come from. And I think we're developing that as an industry over time, and it will be very interesting to see how that progresses and how the role we all play in that. This gets a little more complicated, but I think we're also moving into a world that's very multimodal. We maybe don't think about it that way, but really it's a sort of a stratification. It's a different layers of how things are done and where and on what kinds of platforms. And in the old days, what we used to do is we would use the same skills we had to basically create multiple outputs. And the simplest example is what we called single sourcing, which means we create a translation over here, and then we reuse it for this purpose, for training or for marketing or for something else. And so that was simply a case of really adapting the tool to our known skills and then seeing how can we maybe make things a little more efficient. But that wasn't really a very intelligent way of looking at how content travels and how it's going to be used. So I think in a more modern or a more developed way of looking at it is how do we integrate these various sets of modes. So for example, written translation and spoken interpreting, speech technology and text, and all kinds of things around that, because perhaps it's not normal or it's not most productive anymore to think in terms of translation is on one side and interpreting is over here, and there's nothing in the middle. I think we need to start thinking about these modes and how they work together and how we can create more value for ourselves and for our clients. The most complex set of skills, I think, is what I would call relational. And that has to do with making connections. Many things that we deal with, really, if you think about it, have to do with how do we connect different parts of our business or different parts of our skill sets or different parts of our customers and make them more effective. And in the old days, I say old days, but that's really today, we pair sort of skills, connect them, and call them something new. So I use the term transcreation here as an example. I don't think transcreation is really anything new, but we want to think somehow that it's new because really it's maybe a little more creative translation or something like that, where we're combining we're relating localization and translation and some things more closely. But it's really not a very useful or interesting model to think about in terms of the relational aspect of things. So I think it's important to remember what relational means. Relational means the connection between two people or two things. And if you think about it, when you talk about the relationship between two or more people, you're talking about localization. You're talking about really a locale of one person. And eventually, I think, as an industry, we're moving in that direction where content and translation and language is all adapted for an individual, not just a country or a language or a market, but very much down to very, very small groups. And so it's critical for us in the language business to understand how do we develop towards that model? How are we able to create a localization for this group that has 150 different kinds of locales? How can we possibly manage something like that? And then on the set of things, we're all starting to feel the Internet of Things around us, right? I mean, connected cars and connected devices and connected refrigerators and so forth. Everything is connecting with each other as well. And so we have to think about how do we help connect everything to everything else in this business, because the language piece will always be the center, and then we have to build a model around that helps us relate each of these things to the others. So what I would say is one of the things we need to do is figure out, develop some knowledge and skills around how do we help customers make connections that drive outcomes for things that they really want. And I've given an example here of multilingual sentiment analysis, another fancy set of words, which really means this when you look at this picture. Why do I have a picture of this gentleman in India who got the first iPhone when he stood in line and got the first iPhone, I think that's a 6S, in the Indian store? Why is he taking a picture of himself in front of a poster? He's doing that because he's expressing a sentiment. He's expressing a customer outcome. And why is this important for a company like Apple? Because Apple wants to know what is driving this person to do this, and wants to be able to create products and create content that is going to make this person do more of those things. Stand in line for the next iPhone and the next one, just like I have. But so they study this and they understand what when they tweet, when they go out in social media, when they create content around something, what are they saying? What does this mean for the company, for the product, and so forth? And we, in our business, have to understand that too. We have to know how can we help our customers understand this gentleman better and be part of the chain that will continue to create value all the way going forward. So this is kind of the idea of relating not just words, but also feelings and outcomes and actions, and helping our customers create actions that they want. So all of that is kind of complex, because in the old days we sort of could settle with just sitting and doing translations. I did many hours of translation myself, and it was wonderful, but I never thought about sentiment analysis or relational anything. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But I think if all of us in this business start kind of collecting these skills together, we can create a workforce that's going to be more powerful and more in demand and more useful to our customers down the line. So what is Homo Linguisticus? Well, I'm not sure, but let me give you just a couple of thoughts. I think in general, it is a combination of humans and tools, man and machine. Not to be too sci-fi about it, but we really need to think in terms of how do we integrate these two sides. And so for one thing, it means to me processing, which is what tools are very good at, and thinking, which tools are not very good at. So how do we decide which things need to go in which area? The tools do analytics, right? They can measure things and they can collect all kinds of data that humans would be terrible at doing. But they can't adapt that data. They don't know what to do with it. So the humans have to learn to interpret that data and do something with it. The machines are very good at processing and very quickly doing things. But they can't determine a purpose. They don't know why are they doing anything. And so on the human side, we need to be always thinking about why is this happening and why do we need this information and why do we need to build from there. And also, you know, on the machines, you have a lot of engineering considerations and sort of scientific and technological considerations, but machines don't have empathy. I don't know if that term, how easily that translates, but empathy is that the notion of being able to understand what someone else feels, to be able to realize, oh, you want this. It's not about yourself, it's about feeling for others. Machines don't do that. So we need that combination of machines and humans that can bring this data and this empathy together. I also think it's important that we think in terms of incomes multiplying outcomes. So, you know, all of us want to be in business and we need to make a living. We need to have a good business, which is kind of a machine sort of technological discussion. And at the same time, we need to meet our clients' needs. If we don't meet our clients' needs, or even better, their wants, if we get them what they really want, then we won't be in business for very long. We need profit on the business side, have to have profit, because we can't live otherwise. Even individual freelancers, you don't necessarily think in terms of profit, but you have to make enough money to be able to live, or you can't have a job. At the same time, the client needs results. So helping that client understand how to achieve those results will drive both of those things. And this is a little bit linguistically tricky, but we need the right motions, the right steps, the right tasks, combined with the right emotions, with the right sorts of understanding of our clients, understanding of ourselves, and understanding of outcomes. And finally, I think it's important to think of these a little bit of a word of caution, because machines are not humans. And that's obvious, but at the same time, we sometimes, I think, tend to make them equivalents. And even when we talk about the fear of machine translation, that they will replace humans, I don't have that fear personally. And I think anyone who studies machine translation, like Marco here and knows the field, doesn't have a fear that machine translation is going to replace humans. They're not the same. So remember, tools, just because you have tools, doesn't mean they're the best process. You have to look at how to adapt those things as you go forward. Just because you have metrics and you have data doesn't mean that's a reason to do something. Again, the machine can produce data, but you have to interpret it and understand, do I need this data? What does it do for me? And finally, it's really important, and I think for all of us, that the stuff that we translate, the piles of content and so forth, doesn't necessarily mean its value. We were talking about that this morning, that all content that is produced is not necessarily good content. or useful or desirable. So can we help our customers and ourselves create a world where we actually produce more desirable content, more useful content, and less mechanically reproduce bad content or useless content? So these are just some thoughts I wanted to share with you, and I hope that together as a group we will be able to move forward and create the new Homo Linguisticus. We are certainly eminently qualified to do that here, and I look forward to talking with many of you more. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a great conference.